What if I told you that a single man's ideas about happiness, virtue, and the nature of reality still guide how we think about everything from personal ethics to modern politics over 2,300 years later? This is the enduring wisdom of Aristotle, the philosopher who mapped the blueprint for human flourishing. Aristotle, student of Plato, tutor to Alexander the Great, and arguably the most influential thinker in Western philosophy. But beyond his fame as the father of logic, Aristotle's life reveals a systematic mind obsessed with understanding the very essence of existence. Today we're diving deep into his revolutionary principles, his pursuit of eudaimonia, his concept of the golden mean, and his belief that humans are fundamentally political animals. Born in 384 BC in the small town of Stagira in northern Greece, Aristotle entered the world as the son of Nicomachus, court physician to the Macedonian king. This early exposure to the royal court would shape his lifelong connection to power and politics. When both his parents died during his childhood, young Aristotle was left in the care of his guardian, Proxenus of Atarneus. At 17, Aristotle made the journey to Athens, the intellectual center of the ancient world, to study at Plato's academy. For nearly 20 years, he remained there, earning the nickname Mind of the School from his teacher. But this wasn't just a student passively absorbing knowledge. Aristotle was already developing his own philosophical approach, one that would eventually challenge his master's idealism with a more grounded empirical perspective. When Plato died in 347 BC, Aristotle didn't inherit the academy's leadership. Some say he was disappointed with the institution's new direction. Others suggest the anti-Macedonian sentiment in Athens made his position uncomfortable. Whatever the reason, Aristotle left to establish his own school, the Lyceum, where he would spend his final years developing the systematic philosophy that would influence human thought for millennia. Principle 1. The pursuit of eudaimonia, true human flourishing. Aristotle's entire ethical system revolves around a single powerful question that has captivated philosophers for over 2 millennia. What makes for a truly good life? His answer was eudaimonia, often translated as happiness, but meaning something far deeper and more profound than momentary pleasure or contentment. For Aristotle, eudaimonia represents human flourishing at its finest, a state of well-being achieved through the excellent use of our uniquely human capacity, reason. The revolutionary nature of eudaimonia. To understand the revolutionary impact of Aristotle's concept, we must first recognize how radically it departed from common understandings of happiness, both in his time and ours. Unlike the hedonistic pursuit of pleasure championed by philosophers like Aristippus, or the simple accumulation of wealth and honors that many of his contemporaries pursued, Aristotle's eudaimonia is fundamentally about activity of the rational soul in accordance with virtue. It's not something you feel in a moment of joy or satisfaction. It's something you become through a lifetime of excellent choices and virtuous actions. The Greek word itself provides crucial insight into Aristotle's meaning. Eudaimonia literally translates to good spirit, or being blessed by a good deity. This etymology suggests not just a positive emotional state, but a condition of being that approaches the divine, a state where humans fulfill their highest potential. When Aristotle speaks of eudaimonia, he's describing what the Jubilee Center for Character and Virtues calls human flourishing, not merely being happy, but fulfilling one's potential as a human being. The function argument, discovering human purpose. Aristotle's path to understanding eudaimonia leads through what scholars call his function argument, one of the most influential pieces of reasoning in Western philosophy. The logic is elegantly simple yet profound. Just as a flute player achieves goodness by playing the flute well, and a sculptor achieves goodness by sculpting excellently, human beings achieve their good by performing their characteristic function excellently. But what is the human function? Aristotle systematically eliminates possibilities that we share with other living beings. Life itself cannot be our function, as he notes, because it is evidently shared with plants as well, but we are looking for what is special. Similarly, perception and sensation cannot define our essence, since these capacities extend even to the horse, the ox, and every animal. What remains is rational activity, the capacity for reason, choice, and deliberation that distinguishes humans from all other creatures. As Christine Korsgaard explains in her analysis of the function argument, when Aristotle identifies rational activity as the function of a human being, he doesn't mean that we should spend our lives in abstract contemplation. Rather, he means that rational activity is how a human life is conducted, how a human being does what he or she characteristically does. Eudaimonia as complete and sufficient good. Aristotle's formal definition reveals the depth of his conception. Eudaimonia is a complete and sufficient good. This means several crucial things that distinguish it from all other goods we might pursue. First, it is desired entirely for its own sake, never as a means to something else. When we ask someone why they want to be happy, the question seems absurd. Happiness is the end point of our wanting, not a stepping stone to something further. Second, eudaimonia is self-sufficient in that it makes life desirable and lacking in nothing. As one scholar explains, eudaimonia cannot be made more desirable by the addition of even the least of goods because any such good is already a component of perfect eudaimonia. This doesn't mean the eudaimon person needs nothing external. Friends, health, and basic resources all contribute to flourishing. Rather, it means that someone who has achieved eudaimonia has achieved the complete human good. Third, and perhaps most importantly, eudaimonia exhibits what Aristotle calls finality. It is the ultimate end toward which all our other activities properly aim. We exercise, not for its own sake, but for health. We pursue education, not merely to accumulate facts, but to develop our minds. We seek friendships, not simply to have companions, but because relationships are essential to human flourishing. Eudaimonia provides the organizing principle that gives coherence and direction to a human life. Activity, not state, the dynamic nature of flourishing. One of Aristotle's most psychologically astute insights concerns the active nature of eudaimonia. Unlike modern conceptions that treat happiness as a feeling or mental state, Aristotelian flourishing is fundamentally about activity, specifically, activity of soul in accordance with virtue. As one contemporary scholar puts it, eudaimonia is a disposition rather than a state. It's about what you do and how you live, not what you feel at any given moment. This active conception explains why Aristotle famously declares that one swallow does not make a summer, nor does one day, and so too one day or short time does not make a man blessed and happy. Eudaimonia requires a complete life lived excellently. You cannot achieve it in a moment of success or lose it due to temporary setbacks. It emerges from the pattern of choices and activities that constitute an entire human existence. The practical implications are profound. If happiness were merely a feeling, we might seek it through immediate pleasures or mood-altering experiences. But since eudaimonia is activity in accordance with virtue, it requires the slow, patient work of character development. We become flourishing people not by pursuing happiness directly, but by cultivating excellence in our thinking, choosing, and acting. Virtue as excellence, the path to flourishing. To understand how eudaimonia is achieved, we must grasp Aristotle's conception of virtue, arete, as excellence or mastery. The Greek word arete doesn't primarily connote moral righteousness in our modern sense. It refers to any kind of excellence that enables something to perform its function superbly. A virtuous knife cuts excellently, a virtuous eye sees clearly, a virtuous carpenter builds skillfully. Human virtue, then, is the excellence that enables us to perform our characteristic function, rational activity, supremely well. But Aristotle recognizes that human reason operates in multiple domains, leading him to distinguish between intellectual virtues and moral virtues. Intellectual virtues like wisdom, Sophia, and scientific knowledge, episteme, perfect our capacity for understanding truth. Moral virtues like courage, temperance, and justice perfect our capacity for making excellent choices in the practical affairs of life. Crucially, both types of virtue are required for eudaimonia. Pure intellectual achievement without moral excellence leads to a truncated life, brilliant but lacking in human relationships and practical wisdom. Conversely, moral virtue without intellectual development leaves us well-intentioned but potentially ineffective. The flourishing life integrates both dimensions of human excellence. Character formation through habituation. Perhaps Aristotle's most psychologically sophisticated insight concerns how virtue develops. Unlike intellectual skills that can be learned through instruction, moral virtues are acquired through habituation, hexis, the repeated practice of excellent choices until they become second nature. As he famously observes, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. This process of character formation is neither automatic nor effortless. It requires what Aristotle calls practical wisdom, phronesis, the ability to discern the right action, at the right time, in the right way, toward the right people. Practical wisdom cannot be reduced to following rules or applying abstract principles. It emerges through experience, reflection, and the gradual development of moral perception that comes from living thoughtfully. The habituation process also explains why eudaimonia is fundamentally about character rather than consequences. We don't act courageously in order to achieve happiness. Rather, the person who has developed the habit of courage naturally acts in ways that contribute to human flourishing. The virtuous person finds deep satisfaction in virtuous activity precisely because such activity expresses their developed character. The integration of individual and communal good. Aristotle's vision of eudaimonia brilliantly integrates individual fulfillment with communal well-being. Because humans are fundamentally political animals who achieve their full potential only within communities, individual flourishing and the common good are not competing interests but complementary aspects of the same reality. The virtuous person doesn't sacrifice personal happiness for social responsibility. Rather, they discover that their own deepest fulfillment comes through contributing to the flourishing of their community. This integration appears in Aristotle's treatment of friendship, which he considers essential to eudaimonia. The highest form of friendship, what he calls friendship of virtue, occurs between people who care for each other's character development and moral growth. Such relationships simultaneously serve individual flourishing by providing the context for virtue development and communal good by creating bonds of mutual care and shared commitment to excellence. The enduring relevance of eudaimonic thinking. Aristotle's conception of eudaimonia offers profound resources for contemporary discussions of well-being and human development. In an age often characterized by the pursuit of immediate gratification, consumer satisfaction, and subjective emotional states, the Aristotelian emphasis on character, virtue, and long-term flourishing provides a compelling alternative vision. Modern positive psychology has rediscovered many Aristotelian insights, distinguishing between hedonic well-being, pleasure and positive emotions, and eudaimonic well-being, meaning, personal growth, and the realization of human potential. Research consistently shows that while both contribute to life satisfaction, eudaimonic well-being provides deeper and more lasting fulfillment. The Aristotelian framework also speaks to contemporary concerns about education and character development. Rather than focusing solely on academic achievement or career preparation, an eudaimonic approach to education emphasizes the formation of practical wisdom, moral character, and the capacities needed for lifelong learning and growth. Schools inspired by this vision don't just transmit information, they cultivate human excellence. The challenge and promise of the flourishing life. Aristotle's vision of eudaimonia presents both a challenge and a promise. The challenge lies in its demanding nature. Flourishing requires sustained effort, moral development, intellectual growth, and often difficult choices that prioritize long-term excellence over immediate satisfaction. There are no shortcuts to character, no quick fixes for the deep work of becoming an excellent human being. But the promise is equally profound, that humans can achieve something approaching divine blessedness through the excellent use of our distinctive capacities. Unlike happiness conceived as pleasure or contentment, eudaimonia promises a form of fulfillment that deepens rather than diminishes with time, that integrates rather than fragments human experience, and that connects individual growth with service to the larger human community. In our contemporary context, this ancient wisdom offers a path toward what researchers now call authentic happiness, well-being rooted not in external circumstances or temporary emotional states, but in the development of character, the cultivation of meaning, and the pursuit of excellence in all dimensions of human life. For Aristotle, this represents not just one good among others, but the organizing principle that can transform a merely successful life into a truly flourishing one. Principle 2, the golden mean, the art of virtuous balance. Perhaps Aristotle's most practical and psychologically sophisticated contribution to ethics is his theory of the golden mean, the revolutionary idea that virtue lies not in rigid rules or absolute positions, but in the balanced middle ground between extremes of excess and deficiency. This doctrine represents one of the most nuanced approaches to moral decision-making ever developed, offering a framework that acknowledges both the complexity of human nature and the contextual nature of ethical behavior. Understanding the mean, beyond mathematical averages. Take courage, Aristotle's paradigmatic example of virtue. True bravery isn't the absence of fear, which would actually constitute foolhardiness, nor is it being overwhelmed by fear, which manifests as cowardice. Instead, courage is the virtuous response that navigates skillfully between these extremes, feeling and expressing the appropriate amount of fear for the specific circumstances. The courageous person judges that some dangers are worth facing and others not, and experiences fear to a degree that is appropriate to his circumstances. But here lies Aristotle's brilliant and often misunderstood insight. The mean isn't a mathematical average or a simple compromise between two positions. As he carefully explains in the Nicomachean Ethics, the arithmetic mean between 10 and 2 is 6, and this is so invariably, whatever is being counted. But the intermediate point that is chosen by an expert in any of the crafts will vary from one situation to another. The golden mean is relative to the individual and situation. What constitutes appropriate generosity for a wealthy person differs dramatically from what's appropriate for someone with modest means. This relativity extends beyond economic circumstances to encompass personality, cultural context, relationships, and countless other variables. A parent needs different responses for different children. The shy child might need encouragement to take risks and speak up, while the impulsive child might need help learning restraint and consideration. The mean, the appropriate response, isn't the same for both situations. The architecture of virtue, mapping the moral landscape. Aristotle's systematic approach to virtue reveals an elegant architecture underlying human character. He demonstrates that every ethical virtue is a condition intermediate between two other states, one involving excess and the other deficiency. This creates what scholars call a topography of virtue, a moral map that places virtues between states of excess and deficiency. The dynamic nature of virtuous response. Crucially, Aristotle's golden mean is not static or passive. It doesn't advocate for bland moderation or the avoidance of strong action. As contemporary philosophers note, the golden mean ought not to be viewed as suggesting that a virtuous disposition is always one that gives rise to a middling action. Sometimes the virtuous response requires extreme action, exceptional courage in facing genuine danger, extraordinary generosity in times of great need, or remarkable patience in dealing with difficult circumstances. The key insight is that virtue involves appropriate response rather than moderate response. As one scholar explains, courage is the appropriate response to danger or challenge. Sometimes courage looks like charging forward despite fear. Other times, courage looks like restraint, walking away from a pointless fight, admitting you're wrong, or choosing not to enable someone's destructive behavior. The coward consistently falls short of what situations demand. The reckless person consistently overshoots. The courageous person responds appropriately, adapting their response to context. Practical wisdom, the master virtue. The golden mean requires what Aristotle calls phronesis, practical wisdom or prudence, which he identifies as perhaps the most crucial virtue for living well. Practical wisdom is the ability to discern the right action at the right time, in the right way, toward the right people. It represents the intellectual virtue that enables all other virtues to function properly. Practical wisdom involves several interconnected capacities. Situational assessment, the ability to accurately perceive the ethically salient features of particular circumstances. This includes understanding the people involved, their current states, the relationships at play, the stakes involved, and the likely consequences of different approaches. Experiential learning, unlike theoretical knowledge that can be learned from books, practical wisdom develops through lived experience and reflection. It represents what Aristotle calls learned and stored knowledge that provides the foundation for good judgment in making decisions. Contextual judgment, the capacity to apply universal moral principles to particular situations in ways that serve human flourishing. This requires understanding that the same action can be virtuous in one situation and vicious in another. Emotional intelligence. Practical wisdom involves not just cognitive analysis, but also what modern research calls emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize, understand, and appropriately respond to emotions in oneself and others. The process of ethical decision-making. Aristotle's framework provides a sophisticated method for navigating moral decisions. When faced with challenging situations, we can apply what contemporary ethicists call the Aristotelian decision-making process. First, identify the extremes. What would too much look like in this situation? What would too little look like? If dealing with a workplace conflict, too much might involve aggressive confrontation or public humiliation, while too little might mean complete avoidance or enabling continued harmful behavior. Second, assess the particular circumstances. What does this specific moment actually call for? Consider the personalities involved, their current emotional states, your relationship with them, the organizational culture, the stakes involved, and the likely outcomes of different approaches. Third, choose the virtuous response. This isn't necessarily the safe middle, but the response that best serves human flourishing in these particular circumstances. Sometimes this requires more directness than feels comfortable. Sometimes it demands more restraint than feels satisfying. Fourth, act and learn. Implement your choice and pay attention to results. Did your response serve the situation? What would you do differently next time? Virtue develops through this cycle of thoughtful action and reflective learning. The challenge of particularity. One of the most sophisticated aspects of Aristotle's doctrine concerns what philosophers call the problem of particularity: how to apply general virtues to specific situations. Aristotle recognizes that finding the mean in any given situation is not a mechanical or thoughtless procedure, but requires a full and detailed acquaintance with the circumstances. This means that virtue cannot be reduced to following rules or consulting algorithms. You cannot outsource moral decision-making to external authorities or mechanical procedures. The development of practical wisdom requires what contemporary virtue ethicists call moral perception, the trained ability to see the ethical dimensions of particular situations and respond appropriately. This particularity also explains why moral education cannot consist merely of learning principles or memorizing rules. As Aristotle observes, virtue is not for everyone but for him who knows. It requires the cultivation of character through practice, reflection, and gradually developing wisdom. Like learning to play a musical instrument or master a craft, becoming virtuous requires sustained practice under the guidance of those who have already developed excellence. Contemporary applications and challenges. The Golden Mean framework offers profound resources for contemporary ethical challenges. In professional contexts, it helps navigate the tension between honesty and kindness, between individual achievement and team collaboration, between innovation and responsibility. In personal relationships, it provides guidance for balancing independence and intimacy, assertiveness and accommodation, support and enabling. However, the doctrine also faces important contemporary criticisms. Some argue that identifying the appropriate response assumes shared values and cultural contexts that may not exist in pluralistic societies. Others contend that the framework can become too relativistic, making it difficult to critique practices that a particular culture considers balanced, but others view as harmful. Additionally, the demand for practical wisdom may seem impossibly high in our complex, fast-paced world. How can individuals develop the deep contextual understanding and moral perception required for consistently virtuous choices when facing rapid change, information overload, and competing demands? The promise of balanced excellence. Despite these challenges, Aristotle's Golden Mean continues to offer compelling insights for moral development and decision-making. Its emphasis on contextual judgment rather than rigid rules acknowledges the genuine complexity of ethical life. Its integration of emotion and reason recognizes that moral decisions involve the whole person, not just abstract calculation. Its focus on character development rather than mere rule-following addresses the deep human need for meaning and growth. Perhaps most importantly, the Golden Mean represents what we might call dynamic balance, not the static equilibrium of compromise, but the active, skilled response of someone who has learned to navigate life's complexities with wisdom, courage, and grace. It offers a vision of human excellence that is neither impossibly demanding nor boringly moderate, but rather represents the kind of balanced mastery we recognize in great athletes, artists, leaders, and friends. The Golden Mean ultimately suggests that virtue isn't about perfection or following predetermined scripts, but about developing the practical wisdom to respond appropriately to the endless variety of situations that constitute a human life. In this view, ethical excellence becomes not a destination to reach but a way of traveling, a continuously refined skill of living well in relationship with others and in harmony with our deepest values and highest aspirations. Principle 3. Humans as political animals. Man is by nature a political animal, declared Aristotle in one of philosophy's most famous and enduring assertions. But when the ancient philosopher penned the Greek phrase zoon politikon, he wasn't simply saying humans are social creatures or that we naturally form groups. His deeper and more radical point was that we achieve our full potential only within the framework of a political community, the polis. This principle fundamentally challenges individualistic views of human nature and establishes politics not as an optional add-on to human life, but as the very context in which human excellence becomes possible. Unpacking the zoon politikon, beyond social instinct. The translation of zoon politikon as political animal is itself revealing and controversial. Some scholars argue that social animal better captures Aristotle's meaning for modern audiences, since our word political carries connotations of partisan politics and governmental maneuvering that Aristotle never intended. Yet the more literal political animal is precisely what Aristotle meant. Humans are specifically polis-dwelling creatures, beings whose nature finds fulfillment in the particular form of community represented by the city-state. What distinguishes humans as political animals isn't merely our tendency to congregate. Many animals do that. Bees form hives, ants build colonies, wolves hunt in packs. Rather, humans possess logos, a term meaning both speech and reason which other animals lack. As Aristotle explains, while other animals have phone, mere voice or sound, sufficient to express pleasure and pain, humans alone have speech capable of articulating the expedient and the inexpedient, and therefore also the just and the unjust. This capacity for reasoned discourse about ethics, justice, and the common good is what makes genuine political community possible. The polis isn't simply a larger herd, it's a speech community where citizens engage in deliberation about how to live well together. Political life, in Aristotle's view, fundamentally involves collective reasoning about justice, virtue, and the conditions for human flourishing, activities uniquely enabled by our linguistic and rational capacities. The natural development of political community. For Aristotle, the state isn't an artificial construction or social contract between individuals seeking mutual protection, as later philosophers like Hobbes and Locke would argue. Instead, the polis exists by nature and represents the natural culmination of human development. This political naturalism distinguishes Aristotle sharply from sophists like Lycophron, who claimed the state was merely an alliance and law only a covenant, or from those who saw political organization as conventional rather than natural. Aristotle traces a developmental progression from smaller to larger forms of association, each emerging naturally from the previous one. The process begins with the household, oikos, which forms from the most basic partnerships, male and female for reproduction, and ruler and ruled for preservation. The household exists to meet the daily needs of life: food, shelter, clothing, and physical survival. As families expand and interact with other families, they naturally form villages, larger associations that provide greater self-sufficiency. Villages allow for specialization of labor. People can develop skills in cooking, medicine, building, and various crafts that weren't possible in isolated households. Village life is more comfortable and secure than family life, with access to more goods, services, and knowledge. Finally, when several villages combine, they form the polis or city-state, the final association formed of several villages. As Aristotle writes, for all practical purposes the process is now complete. Self-sufficiency has been reached, and so, while it started as a means of securing life itself, it is now in position to secure the good life. This progression isn't arbitrary or accidental. It represents the unfolding of human nature toward its proper end. The polis as the highest form of association. The polis represents qualitatively more than a larger village, just as the village is more than an extended family. What makes the city-state unique and supreme among human associations is that it alone achieves genuine self-sufficiency, autarkia, and enables not just survival but the good life, EU Zen. While households secure biological life and villages provide comfort and security, only the polis creates the conditions for eudaimonia, complete human flourishing. This claim has profound implications. It means that individuals cannot achieve their highest good in isolation, or even in smaller associations like families. The polis provides what households and villages cannot: opportunities for virtue development through political participation, access to education and culture, the framework for justice, and the conditions for philosophical contemplation. As Aristotle states, the polis is prior by nature to the household and to each of us individually, meaning that logically and teleologically, the political community takes precedence because it represents human nature's complete actualization. The ideal size of the polis reflects this purpose. It should be large enough to be truly self-sufficient, providing all necessities and enabling the division of labor, yet small enough that citizens can know each other and engage in face-to-face political deliberation. Ancient Greek city-states like Athens and Sparta exemplified this scale, where citizens could gather in assemblies, recognize fellow citizens, and participate directly in governance. Political participation and the good life. For Aristotle, citizenship means far more than mere residence or legal status. A citizen is someone who shares in the administration of justice and the holding of public office, someone actively engaged in the deliberative and judicial functions of the community. This isn't an optional activity or hobby. Political participation is essential to living well as a human being. The connection between political engagement and eudaimonia is intimate and necessary. Through participating in political life, debating in assemblies, serving on juries, holding office, citizens develop crucial virtues like justice, practical wisdom, and civic friendship. They learn to balance private interests with the common good, to deliberate about complex ethical questions, and to take responsibility for the community's welfare. These activities exercise our distinctive human capacities for reason and ethical judgment in their highest form. Conversely, those who fail to participate in political life remain incomplete as human beings. As Aristotle provocatively states, a person who by nature doesn't live in a polis is either a poor sort of being or a being higher than man, either deficient or godlike. Normal humans achieve their potential through political community. Withdrawal from politics represents either inability or transcendence of human nature itself. The relationship between individual and polis. Aristotle's political naturalism establishes a relationship of interdependence between individual and community. Individuals rely on the polis for their fulfillment and development. The polis depends on individual participation and virtue for its success and vitality. This isn't a zero-sum competition where individual good must be sacrificed for collective good, or vice versa. Rather, properly understood, individual flourishing and communal well-being are mutually constitutive. This integration appears in Aristotle's treatment of justice. Justice in the polis isn't simply a constraint on individual behavior or a mechanism for resolving conflicts. It represents the virtue that orders the entire community toward the common good, while simultaneously perfecting individuals through its practice. The just person isn't someone who reluctantly follows rules, but someone whose character has been shaped by participation in a just community, and whose actions in turn sustain that community's justice. Citizenship itself becomes a defining aspect of personal identity. To be a citizen is to possess particular rights and responsibilities, voting, jury service, military duty, that shape how one understands oneself and one's place in the world. Exclusion from citizenship, as women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded in ancient Athens, meant exclusion from full humanity as Aristotle conceived it, a troubling implication that later philosophers would rightly challenge. Teleology and political community. Underlying Aristotle's political naturalism is his broader teleological worldview, the conviction that everything in nature has an inherent purpose or end, telos, toward which it naturally develops. The telos of an acorn is to become an oak tree. The telos of a child is to become a mature, virtuous adult. The telos of human beings collectively is the polis. This teleological perspective means that political institutions exist for a purpose, to promote justice and virtue, to facilitate moral and intellectual excellence, and ultimately to enable citizens to achieve eudaimonia. Political arrangements should be evaluated based on how well they serve this end. A good constitution is one that helps citizens develop virtue and live well. A bad constitution thwarts human flourishing and corrupts character. Aristotle's famous analysis of constitutions in the Politics reflects this teleological approach. He examines various political systems, monarchy, aristocracy, polity, rule by virtuous citizens, and their corrupt forms, tyranny, oligarchy, democracy, assessing each based on whether it serves the common good or merely the ruler's private interests. His preference for polity, a mixed constitution balancing different social elements, reflects his belief that the best government facilitates virtue across the broadest range of citizens. The household as political foundation. Aristotle's political theory begins with analysis of the household, oikos, and its internal structure, revealing how domestic relationships lay groundwork for political community. The household involves three fundamental relationships: husband and wife, father and children, and master and slave. Each relationship has its own character and purpose within the economy of the household. The household's purpose is daily preservation and sustenance, meeting basic material needs that make higher pursuits possible. This involves what Aristotle calls oikonomia, household management, and krematistike, wealth acquisition. Natural wealth acquisition involves using resources from nature, farming, herding, fishing, to support the household's needs. Aristotle distinguishes this sharply from unnatural wealth acquisition focused on unlimited accumulation of money, which he critiques as contrary to the household's proper purpose. The household thus provides the foundation for political life in multiple ways. It ensures material survival, transmits culture and virtue to the next generation through family education, and establishes the basic forms of authority and cooperation that scale up to political governance. Yet the household remains subordinate to the polis in Aristotle's hierarchy, because while it preserves life, only the political community enables the good life. Speech, deliberation, and political life. The centrality of logos, speech/reason, to Aristotle's political thought cannot be overstated. Political life fundamentally involves collective deliberation about justice, policy, and the common good, activities that require sophisticated use of language. As Heidegger's interpretation emphasizes, for Aristotle, to live with one another in the polis is to be part of a speech community, to possess and be possessed by language. This explains why Aristotle devotes significant attention to rhetoric, the art of persuasive public speech. Rhetorical activity in the assembly, before the courts, and in ceremonial contexts represents the distinctive mode of human interaction that makes politics possible. Through deliberative rhetoric, citizens persuade each other about future policy. Through forensic rhetoric, they determine justice in particular cases. Through epideictic rhetoric, they praise virtue and build shared values. Political speech differs fundamentally from mere information exchange or emotional expression. It involves practical reasoning about contingent matters, questions that could be otherwise and require judgment rather than demonstration. Should we go to war? How should we distribute resources? What honors should we bestow? These questions don't have mathematical answers. They require the collective wisdom of the community, exercised through deliberative discourse. Enduring significance and contemporary challenges. Aristotle's vision of humans as political animals by nature continues to provoke and inspire political thought. His insistence that individual fulfillment requires political community challenges both ancient sophistic theories and modern liberal individualism. Against views that see society as merely instrumental, a means for protecting individual interests, Aristotle argues that political association is intrinsic to human flourishing. Contemporary communitarians and civic republicans draw on Aristotelian themes, emphasizing that robust democracies require active citizenship, civic virtue, and shared commitment to the common good. The decline of political participation in modern democracies might be understood, from an Aristotelian perspective, as a failure to recognize our fundamentally political nature, a failure with serious consequences for both individual flourishing and collective well-being. Yet Aristotle's political naturalism also faces significant challenges. His acceptance of slavery as natural and his exclusion of women from full citizenship reveal how purportedly natural political arrangements can reflect and entrench unjust social hierarchies. Modern readers rightly question whether any particular form of political organization can claim to be natural in Aristotle's sense, or whether all political arrangements are fundamentally conventional and subject to critique and revision. Additionally, the scale and complexity of modern nation-states differ dramatically from the small, face-to-face polis Aristotle knew. Can his vision of active citizenship and political deliberation scale to societies of millions? Do mass democracy, representative government, and bureaucratic administration fundamentally alter the relationship between individual and community that Aristotle described? The political animal in the modern world. Despite these challenges, Aristotle's core insight retains profound relevance. Humans cannot flourish in isolation. We are constituted by our relationships, languages, and communities in ways that make atomistic individualism psychologically and philosophically inadequate. Our capacity for ethical reasoning, our sense of justice, our very identities as persons emerge from and require ongoing participation in communities that provide frameworks of meaning and value. The question isn't whether we're political animals, but what forms of political community can best serve human flourishing in our contemporary context. Aristotle's framework suggests we should evaluate political arrangements not merely by procedural fairness or economic efficiency, but by whether they enable citizens to develop virtue, exercise practical wisdom, and achieve the good life together. It reminds us that politics at its best isn't a necessary evil or mere mechanism for conflict resolution, but the arena where humans realize their highest potential as rational, social, and ethical beings. In an era of increasing political alienation, declining civic participation, and growing social atomization, Aristotle's vision of the zoon politikon offers both a diagnosis and a challenge. Perhaps our contemporary malaise stems partly from failing to honor our fundamentally political nature, from treating community as optional rather than essential, citizenship as a status rather than an activity, and politics as a spectator sport rather than the arena of our highest human achievement. Principle 4. The primacy of substance and form. In his Metaphysics, Aristotle grappled with fundamental questions that have haunted philosophy since its inception. What makes a thing what it is? What is the nature of reality itself? How can things change yet remain the same? His answer centered on the revolutionary concept of substance, ousia, not as mere matter or material stuff, but as the combination of matter and form that gives each entity its essential identity and makes it fundamentally real. This principle of hylomorphism, from the Greek words hyli, matter, and morphe, form, became one of the most influential doctrines in the history of Western philosophy, shaping medieval scholasticism, early modern science, and contemporary metaphysics. Substance, the foundation of reality. Aristotle's concept of substance represents what he considers the most basic category of being, the foundation upon which all other aspects of reality depend. When he speaks of substance, he isn't referring to a physical material like wood or metal, but rather to the ontologically basic entities that exist independently and serve as the ultimate subjects of predication. Substances are the things that genuinely are, individual horses, particular human beings, specific trees, not abstractions or properties. In the categories, Aristotle distinguishes between primary substances and secondary substances, establishing a hierarchy of being that would influence Western thought for millennia. Primary substances are individual, particular entities. This specific horse, that particular person, the oak tree in your yard. These are ontologically fundamental. If the primary substances did not exist, it would be impossible for any of the other things to exist. Secondary substances, by contrast, are the species and genera under which primary substances fall, the universal categories like horse, human, or tree. These are called substances because they tell us what a primary substance essentially is. When asked what is that, and we answer a horse, we're identifying its secondary substance, its kind or nature. Yet secondary substances depend on primary substances for their existence. There can be no horseness without individual horses. What distinguishes substances from all other categories of being, qualities like color, quantities like size, relations like taller than, is that substances are not in a subject. This technical phrase means substances exist independently and don't depend on something else as their ontological foundation. Whiteness, by contrast, exists in a white object. Heaviness exists in a heavy thing. These properties have what philosophers call ontological dependence. They cannot exist apart from the substances that possess them. Hylomorphism, the unity of matter and form. Aristotle's most sophisticated answer to the question "what is substance?" emerges in his mature metaphysics. Every physical substance is a compound of matter, hyli, and form, morphe. This hylomorphic framework revolutionized philosophical understanding of identity, change, and the structure of reality itself. Consider Aristotle's famous example, a bronze statue. The bronze is the material cause, the physical matter from which the statue is made, the stuff that composes it. But what makes it a statue rather than just a lump of bronze? Its form, the shape, structure, and organizing principle that the sculptor imposed on the material. The form is what makes the bronze this particular thing, a statue of Athena rather than raw metal or a bronze sword. Crucially, for Aristotle, neither matter nor form alone constitutes the substance. The substance is the unified compound of both. You cannot have the statue without bronze, or some material, and you cannot have the statue without its form. Matter provides the potential for various forms. Form provides the actuality that makes matter into a specific, determinate thing. This applies universally across natural and artificial objects. A wooden chair consists of wood, matter structured according to the design of a chair, form. A living organism consists of bodily matter organized according to its soul, which Aristotle conceives as the form of a living body. Even elements like water consist of matter, the underlying substrate, structured by the form that makes it specifically water rather than air or earth. The four causes, understanding complete reality. To fully grasp what something is, Aristotle argues we must understand it through four causes or explanatory principles. This doctrine of the four causes represents one of the most comprehensive frameworks for understanding reality ever developed. 1. The material cause answers the question, what is it made of? This identifies the physical matter or substance from which something is composed. The material cause of a house is the bricks, wood, and other construction materials. The material cause of a bronze statue is bronze. The material cause of a living organism is its bodily matter. 2. The formal cause answers, what is it? This identifies the form, structure, essence, or blueprint that makes something the kind of thing it is. The formal cause of a house is its architectural design, the arrangement that makes these materials a dwelling rather than a pile of building supplies. The formal cause of a statue is the artistic vision and shape imposed by the sculptor. The formal cause of a human being is humanity itself, the essence or definition that makes this organism human. 3. The efficient cause answers, how did it come to be? This identifies the agent or process that brought something into existence. The efficient cause of a house is the builders who constructed it. The efficient cause of a statue is the sculptor who shaped the bronze. The efficient cause of a child is the parents who generated them. This corresponds most closely to what modern science calls cause. 4. The final cause answers. What is it for? This identifies the purpose, goal, or end telos, toward which something is directed. The final cause of a house is to provide shelter. The final cause of a sculpture might be to commemorate a hero or beautify a temple. The final cause of a human being is eudaimonia, flourishing through the exercise of reason and virtue. For Aristotle, complete understanding requires grasping all four causes. Modern science often focuses exclusively on material and efficient causes, but Aristotle insists that formal and final causes are equally necessary for genuine knowledge. To understand an oak tree, we must know not just what it's made of material and how it grew efficient, but what makes it specifically an oak formal, and what it's naturally directed toward, producing acorns and reproducing final. Potentiality and actuality, the dynamics of change. One of Aristotle's most profound insights concerns how things can change while maintaining their identity. His solution introduces the concepts of potentiality, dunamis, and actuality, energia or entelecheia. This distinction revolutionized thinking about change, becoming, and the nature of reality. Potentiality refers to the capacity or possibility for something to change or become actual. An acorn has the potential to become an oak tree. A block of marble has the potential to become a statue. A student has the potential to become knowledgeable. Importantly, potentiality isn't mere logical possibility. It's a real power or capacity inherent in a thing. The acorn genuinely possesses the power to become an oak in a way that a rock does not. Actuality is the realization or fulfillment of potential. The grown oak tree is the actualization of the acorn's potential. The completed statue actualizes the marble's potential. The knowledgeable person actualizes the student's learning potential. Actuality represents the end or goal toward which potentiality is directed. Aristotle distinguishes between two types of actuality: energia, being at work, ongoing activity, and entelecheia, being at an end, complete fulfillment. A person seeing is energia, an ongoing activity that is its own end. A completed house is entelecheia, the full realization of the building process's potential. Both represent actuality, but the first emphasizes process and the second emphasizes completion. Crucially, Aristotle argues that actuality is prior to potentiality in three fundamental ways. In definition, we can only define potentiality by reference to actuality. Buildable means capable of being built. The definition presupposes understanding of the actual building. In time, the actual exists before the potential in the sense that actualization is the goal of potential. The adult human exists as the end toward which the child develops. In substance, the actual is more real or substantial than the potential. A completed sculpture is more fully real than raw marble. An actualized capacity is more substantial than mere possibility. Essence and accident. What makes things what they are? Aristotle's metaphysics distinguishes between essence, what makes a thing the kind of thing it is, and accidents, properties that can change without altering the thing's fundamental nature. This distinction provides a framework for understanding identity and change. Essence consists of the essential properties that define what a substance fundamentally is, the necessary and sufficient conditions for being a particular kind of thing. The essence of a human being includes rationality and animality. The essence of a triangle includes being a three-sided plane figure. These properties cannot change without the thing ceasing to be what it is. If a human lost rationality, they would no longer be human in Aristotle's sense. If a triangle lost a side, it would cease to be a triangle. Accidents are non-essential contingent properties that can change without affecting the substance's fundamental identity. Socrates' height, weight, hair color, and location are all accidents. They can change without Socrates ceasing to be Socrates. A chair's color might fade, but it remains a chair. A tree's leaves fall in autumn, but the tree persists. Aristotle identifies 9 categories of accidents: quantity, quality, relation, habitus, state or condition, time, location, position, action, and passion, being acted upon. Together with substance, these 10 categories constitute Aristotle's complete ontology, his systematic account of the fundamental types of being. The distinction between essence and accident explains how things can change yet remain the same. When Socrates grows a beard or gains weight, accidents change, but his essential nature as a rational animal persists. The substance, the unified compound of matter and form that constitutes Socrates, endures through accidental modifications. Generation and corruption, substantial change. While accidents can change without altering a substance's identity, Aristotle recognizes another type of change, substantial change, or what he calls generation and corruption. This occurs when something comes into being or passes out of existence, when one substance transforms into another substance. Generation and corruption differ from all other types of change: locomotion, change of place; alteration, change of quality; and growth, change of size. When water boils and becomes steam, when wood burns and becomes ash, when an animal dies and decomposes, substantial change occurs. The old substance ceases to exist and a new substance comes into being. Yet even substantial change involves continuity of matter. When wood burns, the matter persists through the transformation, taking on new forms. This explains how generation can occur without violating the principle that nothing comes from absolute nothingness, ex nihilo nihil fit. Matter provides the underlying continuity that makes change intelligible without requiring creation from nothing. The enduring impact of substance and form. Aristotle's metaphysics of substance and form became foundational to Western thought about identity, causation, and the nature of existence. Medieval scholastics like Thomas Aquinas adopted and refined hylomorphism, using it to articulate doctrines about the soul, the Eucharist, and the relationship between God and creation. Early modern philosophers like Leibniz and Spinoza engaged critically with Aristotelian substance theory, even as they developed alternative accounts. In contemporary philosophy, hylomorphism has experienced a renaissance. Philosophers of mind appeal to it in developing non-reductive accounts of consciousness. Metaphysicians use it to understand composition and constitution. Bioethicists employ it in debates about personal identity and the beginning of life. The power of Aristotle's framework lies in its ability to explain how things can be both stable and changing, both unified and composite, both actual and potential. It provides conceptual resources for understanding how a living organism maintains identity through constant molecular turnover, how a person remains the same individual from infancy through old age despite radical physical and psychological changes, and how potential futures are genuinely real aspects of present reality. Perhaps most importantly, the doctrine of substance and form offers a vision of reality as intrinsically intelligible. Things have essences that can be grasped by reason. Forms provide the structures that make scientific knowledge possible. Causes explain not just that things happen but why they happen. In Aristotle's metaphysics, the universe is not a chaos of unrelated events but an ordered cosmos whose fundamental principles the human mind can comprehend. A vision that has inspired scientific and philosophical inquiry for over 2 millennia. Principle 5. Teleological thinking. Everything has a purpose. At the heart of Aristotle's worldview lies teleology, the profound belief that everything in nature has an inherent purpose or goal, telos, toward which it naturally tends. This isn't simply a philosophical preference or methodological convenience. For Aristotle, teleology represents a fundamental feature of reality itself, observable in the regular patterns and goal-directed behaviors that permeate the natural world. An acorn's telos is to become an oak tree. A human being's telos is eudaimonia, flourishing through the excellent use of reason. A bird's wings exist for flight. Sharp teeth in the front of the mouth exist for tearing food. Understanding the purpose of something is essential to truly understanding what it is. This teleological approach means that to understand anything, whether a biological organism, a human action, or a political institution, you must understand its purpose. Good actions are those that fulfill our human telos. Good governments are those that help citizens achieve flourishing. Well-functioning organs are those that successfully accomplish their biological purposes. This principle provides Aristotle with a naturalistic foundation for ethics and politics that doesn't rely on divine commands or arbitrary social contracts. The good for humans isn't imposed from outside by gods or invented by convention. It emerges from what humans essentially are and what we're naturally directed toward. The nature of Aristotelian teleology: immanent, not external. A critical and often misunderstood feature of Aristotle's teleology is that it is immanent rather than external or transcendent. This distinguishes his view sharply from Plato's teleology, which posits an external divine craftsman, the demiurge, who imposes purposes on matter from outside, modeling the universe on eternal forms. For Plato, the cosmos is fundamentally an artifact, designed by an intelligent creator for externally determined purposes. Aristotle rejects this model entirely. As one scholar explains, whereas Plato's teleology is anthropocentric and creationist, Aristotle's is naturalistic and functional. In Aristotle's framework, teleology is built into natural things themselves. It isn't imposed from outside by a designer. The acorn's tendency toward becoming an oak tree isn't the result of some external intelligence directing its development. Rather, the telos resides in the acorn as part of its essential nature. As Aristotle states directly, nature is an end and for the sake of which, Physics 2.2.194b29. This immanent teleology means that natural things have intrinsic purposes that don't depend on anyone's intentions or designs. A heart pumps blood for the sake of sustaining the organism, regardless of whether any mind designed it or intends its function. Plants send their roots down for the sake of obtaining nourishment, not because some external agent planned it that way. Living organisms grow, maintain themselves, and reproduce because these activities constitute their natural ends, the actualization of their potentials. Aristotle distinguishes living things from non-living matter based precisely on this internal goal-directedness. For Aristotle, plants as well as men and beasts have souls, because a soul is, in part, an internal principle of motion. Unlike rocks which fall passively according to external forces, or fire which simply rises, living things move themselves in self-directed ways to eat, protect themselves, grow, and reproduce. This capacity for self-movement toward inherent ends is what defines life itself. Teleology and the four causes. Aristotle's teleological thinking finds its most systematic expression in his doctrine of final causation, the fourth of his famous four causes. As discussed earlier, to fully explain anything requires understanding its material cause, what it's made of, formal cause, what it is, efficient cause, what brought it about, and final cause, what it's for. The final cause or telos answers the question, for the sake of what? Why does the bird have hollow bones? For the sake of flight, lighter bones enable aerial locomotion. Why does the plant grow toward sunlight? For the sake of photosynthesis and survival. Why do humans pursue knowledge? For the sake of understanding and ultimately eudaimonia. Crucially, Aristotle argues that final causes are genuinely explanatory. They provide understanding that cannot be reduced to material and efficient causes alone. Modern mechanistic science often focuses exclusively on how questions, efficient causation, but Aristotle insists we cannot fully understand nature without also answering why questions, final causation. To know how the heart pumps blood, mechanical process, without understanding why it does so, to sustain life, is to have incomplete knowledge of the heart. This doesn't mean Aristotle denies material necessity or mechanical causation. Rather, he argues that teleology and mechanism work together in nature. The heart must pump blood through certain mechanical processes involving muscle contraction and valve operation, material and efficient causes. But these mechanical processes exist precisely because they serve the organism's need for circulation, final cause. Form and purpose organize matter and mechanism toward specific ends. Teleology in biology. The paradigm case. Living organisms represent the paradigm examples of natural teleology in Aristotle's system. The biological realm displays purpose and goal-directedness so obviously that even modern biologists, despite official rejection of teleology, constantly employ teleological language when describing organismal features and behaviors. Consider Aristotle's analysis of animal parts in his biological works. Every organ, limb, and anatomical feature exists for the sake of some function that contributes to the organism's life and well-being. Birds have wings for flying. Fish have gills for breathing underwater. Carnivores have sharp teeth for tearing flesh. These aren't mere descriptions of what these parts do. They're explanations of why these parts exist. Natural selection hasn't eliminated these features because they serve essential functions for survival and reproduction. Aristotle extends this functional analysis to entire organisms and their characteristic activities. Animals engage in goal-directed behavior, seeking food, fleeing predators, caring for offspring, building nests, all oriented toward survival and reproduction. This goal-directedness isn't consciously planned by most animals, yet it's genuinely purposive. The spider doesn't understand engineering, yet it spins webs for catching prey. The bird doesn't study nutrition, yet it feeds its young for their survival. Even biological development exhibits teleology. The acorn develops into an oak tree through a regular, orderly process that couldn't be explained by chance or random material interactions alone. Aristotle argues that the regularity and consistency of natural processes provide empirical evidence for teleology. If development were merely random material shuffling, we wouldn't see the same outcomes arising consistently. The fact that acorns regularly become oak trees, not maple trees or rabbits, indicates intrinsic goal-directedness. The human telos, reason and eudaimonia. For human beings specifically, Aristotle's teleological framework provides the foundation for his entire ethical and political philosophy. Just as every natural kind has its characteristic telos, humans have a distinctive end determined by our essential nature as rational animals. As Aristotle argues through his function argument, discussed earlier, the human telos is eudaimonia, flourishing achieved through the excellent exercise of our rational capacities. This isn't arbitrary or conventional, it follows from what humans essentially are. Just as the telos of a knife is to cut well, because cutting is what knives are essentially for, the telos of a human being is to reason well and live virtuously, because rational activity is what humans are essentially capable of. This teleological grounding provides Aristotle's ethics with objective normative force. Good isn't subjectively defined by individual preference or socially constructed by convention. Rather, goodness for any entity consists in fulfilling its natural function excellently. A good knife cuts well, a good horse runs fast and carries loads, a good human being thinks clearly and acts virtuously. Each kind of thing has standards of excellence built into its nature. The same teleological logic extends to political institutions. The polis exists for the sake of enabling citizens to achieve eudaimonia. A good constitution is one that successfully serves this end. A corrupt constitution is one that fails to promote human flourishing or actively impedes it. Politics isn't merely about power or resource distribution. It's about creating the conditions for humans to fulfill their natural purpose. Habit and goal-directed action. Aristotle's teleology profoundly shapes his understanding of human psychology and behavior. In his view, human actions are inherently purposive. They're always oriented toward some perceived good or goal. Even habitual actions retain their teleological character. Habits are goal-directed dispositions acquired through practice. Importantly, Aristotle's conception of habits differs fundamentally from modern behaviorist views that treat habits as rigid, automatic, non-cognitive responses. For Aristotle, habits represent acquired forms of practical wisdom, learned patterns of goal-directed behavior that enable us to successfully pursue our ends. When we develop the habit of courage, we acquire a disposition to respond appropriately to danger for the sake of noble action and our own flourishing. The habit doesn't replace purposiveness, it embodies and expresses it. This explains why character development is central to Aristotelian ethics. Through repeated practice of virtuous actions, we shape ourselves toward our natural end. We become the kind of people capable of achieving eudaimonia. Virtue isn't imposed from outside. It's the actualization of our natural human potential, the fulfillment of our telos as rational and social beings. Teleology and modern science. Controversy and reconciliation. Aristotle's teleological framework fell into disrepute during the scientific revolution, as mechanistic explanations emphasizing material and efficient causes came to dominate natural philosophy. Figures like Descartes, Bacon, and Newton rejected final causes as unscientific anthropomorphism, arguing that nature operates through blind mechanical processes without purposes or goals. This rejection seemed vindicated by physics and chemistry, where mechanistic explanations proved spectacularly successful. Yet biology presented a problem. Living organisms undeniably appear purposive. Their parts serve functions, their behaviors pursue goals, and their development follows regular patterns toward mature forms. How could this apparent teleology be reconciled with mechanistic science? Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection provided what many saw as the solution: apparent design without a designer. Natural selection mechanically produces adaptations that serve organismal survival and reproduction without requiring any inherent purposes or goals. Random variation combined with differential reproduction creates the appearance of purposiveness through purely mechanical processes. However, recent scholarship reveals a surprising conclusion. Darwinian evolution is actually compatible with, and perhaps even requires, Aristotelian teleology properly understood. As several philosophers of biology have argued, natural selection presupposes that organismal traits have functions and that organisms engage in goal-directed behavior. To say that sharp teeth were selected for tearing food, or that wings were selected for flight, is to make teleological claims about what these features are for. The key insight is that Aristotle's immanent teleology doesn't require conscious design. Natural selection can serve as the efficient cause that establishes and maintains the teleological organization of living things. Evolution explains how organisms come to possess their functional organization. It doesn't eliminate the fact that they do possess such organization and that their parts genuinely serve purposes. As one scholar puts it, while Aristotle takes it as a basic fact of nature that animals come well adapted, with a capacity to reproduce themselves, Darwin offers a mechanism, viz. Natural selection, by which well-adaptedness is established and maintained. Both frameworks recognize that biological parts exist because they contribute to organismal survival and reproduction. The difference lies in whether this functional organization is taken as a brute fact of nature, Aristotle, or explained by an evolutionary process, Darwin. Contemporary relevance and criticisms. Aristotle's teleological thinking faces legitimate challenges in modern contexts. Critics argue that teleology inappropriately attributes purposes to unconscious natural processes, committing what philosophers call the intentional fallacy, treating non-intentional phenomena as if they were products of conscious design. Additionally, modern physics seems thoroughly non-teleological. Elementary particles don't have purposes, chemical reactions don't aim at goals, gravitational attraction doesn't serve functions. Extending teleological explanation beyond biology risks imposing purpose where none exists. Yet defenders of Aristotelian teleology offer several responses. First, Aristotle himself limits natural teleology primarily to living things. While he attributes purposes to the heavenly bodies, he recognizes that simple elements like earth, air, fire, and water exhibit only minimal teleology. They naturally move toward their proper places but lack the complex goal-directed organization of organisms. Second, modern cybernetics and systems theory have developed sophisticated accounts of goal-directedness without consciousness, feedback mechanisms, homeostatic processes, and self-organizing systems that exhibit purposive behavior without intention. These developments suggest that teleological explanation needn't presuppose conscious design. Third, contemporary philosophy of biology increasingly recognizes that functional and teleological language is indispensable for biological explanation. We cannot adequately describe biological phenomena without reference to what organs are for, what behaviors are directed toward, and how traits contribute to survival. This suggests that Aristotelian teleology, properly understood, captures something genuinely real about living systems: the enduring power of purposive explanation. Aristotle's teleological worldview offers profound resources for understanding ourselves and our place in nature. By recognizing that humans have a natural telos, that there are objective standards for human flourishing grounded in our nature rather than arbitrary preference, Aristotelian teleology provides a framework for meaningful ethics and politics. In an age often characterized by nihilism, relativism, and the feeling that existence is purposeless, Aristotle reminds us that purposiveness is real and pervasive. We aren't accidents floating in a meaningless universe. We're beings with a nature, a function, and a proper end. Our lives have meaning not because we invent it through arbitrary choices, but because we can discover and fulfill our inherent purposes. Moreover, Aristotelian teleology supports an ecological worldview that recognizes intrinsic value and purpose in nature. If living things have their own inherent ends, then they possess a kind of value independent of human utility. The oak tree's telos of growing, thriving, and reproducing gives it a good of its own, a flourishing we can either support or thwart. This perspective grounds environmental ethics without requiring appeals to sentience or divine creation. Ultimately, Aristotle's teleological thinking represents an integrative vision that refuses to split reality into purposeless matter and disembodied meaning. Purpose pervades the natural world, most fully expressed in living things and especially in humans with our capacity for rational self-direction. Understanding our telos, what we're naturally directed toward, provides the foundation for living well, both individually and collectively. In this sense, Aristotle's ancient wisdom remains remarkably contemporary. To understand ourselves and how we should live, we must first grasp what we're for. Principle 6. The unity of knowledge and practical wisdom. Unlike modern academic specialization that fragments knowledge into isolated disciplines, Aristotle saw all knowledge as interconnected, a unified intellectual enterprise where different domains illuminate and reinforce each other. His exploration of logic informed his biology, his ethics shaped his politics, his metaphysics grounded his natural philosophy. This integrative vision reflects Aristotle's conviction that reality itself is unified, and therefore genuine understanding requires grasping the connections that bind different areas of inquiry together. Yet within this unified framework, Aristotle also recognized a crucial distinction between theoretical knowledge, episteme, and practical wisdom, phronesis. Two fundamentally different modes of intellectual excellence suited to different domains of human experience. The interconnected sciences. Aristotle's systematic vision. Aristotle's intellectual output reveals an astonishingly comprehensive system spanning what we now consider separate fields: logic, metaphysics, physics, biology, psychology, ethics, politics, rhetoric, and poetics. But these weren't disconnected pursuits for Aristotle. They formed an integrated whole where insights from one domain enriched understanding in others. His logical works, collectively called the organon, meaning instrument, weren't studied for their own sake, but as tools for acquiring knowledge in all other sciences. The organon comprises 6 treatises that progress systematically: the categories, analyzing fundamental types of being; on interpretation, studying propositions; prior analytics, developing syllogistic logic; posterior analytics, establishing scientific demonstration; topics, covering dialectical reasoning; and sophistical refutations, identifying fallacies. This logical toolbox provided methods for definition, demonstration, and argumentation applicable across all fields of inquiry. Aristotle's metaphysics establishes the foundational principles that undergird all particular sciences. His concepts of substance and accident, potentiality and actuality, matter and form, and the 4 causes provide conceptual frameworks that appear throughout his work, in his analysis of biological development, in his account of ethical character formation, and in his understanding of political institutions. Metaphysics is first philosophy precisely because it studies being as such, the most general features of reality that all particular sciences presuppose. His biological investigations demonstrate how empirical observation and logical systematization work together. Aristotle pioneered comparative anatomy, classified animals according to their essential characteristics, and explained biological phenomena through his framework of formal and final causes. Remarkably, his biological insights inform his ethics. The concept of human flourishing, eudaimonia, emerges from understanding humans as a natural kind with a characteristic function, just as oak trees and horses have their distinctive functions. The connection between ethics and politics exemplifies Aristotelian integration. Since humans are by nature political animals who achieve their telos within communities, individual virtue and political organization cannot be studied separately. Ethics examines what makes individual humans flourish. Politics examines what institutional arrangements enable that flourishing. As Aristotle states, politics is the architectonic or master science that determines how other practical knowledge should be applied for the common good. The architecture of knowledge: theoretical, practical, and productive. Within his unified vision, Aristotle distinguishes 3 fundamental types of knowledge, each suited to different aspects of human life and requiring different intellectual virtues. 1. Theoretical knowledge, episteme. This concerns universal truths about necessary and unchanging realities. Theoretical sciences seek understanding for its own sake, not for any practical application. They include metaphysics, first philosophy studying being as such, mathematics, studying quantity and number, and natural philosophy or physics, studying natural substances and their changes. The defining feature of episteme is that its objects cannot be otherwise. Mathematical truths, metaphysical principles, and natural laws hold universally and necessarily. 2. Practical knowledge. Phronesis. This involves deliberation about particular actions and good choices in specific situations. Practical wisdom concerns variable, contingent matters of human action, where things could be different depending on our choices. Unlike theoretical knowledge that contemplates eternal truths, practical wisdom guides action in the ever-changing circumstances of human life. As Aristotle explains, practical wisdom is a truth-attaining rational quality concerned with action in relation to things that are good for human beings. 3. Productive knowledge. Techne. This concerns skill in making or crafting things. Techne is the knowledge possessed by artisans, craftspeople, and artists. It guides the production of external objects like houses, sculptures, or poems. While related to practical wisdom, both deal with contingent matters. Techne aims at products external to the activity itself, whereas phronesis aims at action that expresses good character. This tripartite division isn't arbitrary but reflects fundamental differences in the objects of knowledge and the purposes of knowing. Theoretical knowledge seeks truth about necessary realities. Practical wisdom seeks good action in contingent circumstances. Productive knowledge seeks excellent craftsmanship in making things. The intellectual virtues. Excellence in different modes of thinking. Corresponding to these types of knowledge, Aristotle identifies 5 intellectual virtues, excellences of mind that enable us to grasp truth in different domains. Theoretical virtues. Nous, intuitive reason, the capacity to grasp first principles, the fundamental axioms and definitions that cannot themselves be demonstrated but provide the starting points for all demonstration. For example, nous enables us to grasp the principle of non-contradiction or to intuit basic mathematical axioms. This is immediate, non-inferential intellectual apprehension of foundational truths. Episteme. Scientific knowledge, the ability to demonstrate conclusions from first principles through rigorous logical deduction. While nous grasps starting points, episteme develops systematic knowledge by deriving necessary conclusions. This is the virtue exercised in mathematical proofs and scientific demonstrations. Sophia, theoretical wisdom, the highest form of theoretical knowledge, combining nous and episteme. Sophia represents complete understanding of the most fundamental and universal truths, knowledge of first causes and principles combined with the ability to derive systematic knowledge from them. Aristotle considers this the most divine form of knowledge because it concerns the most excellent objects, the eternal structures of reality itself. Practical virtue. Phronesis. Practical wisdom, the capacity for excellent deliberation about what conduces to living well. Unlike theoretical virtues that contemplate eternal truths, phronesis involves judging particular situations correctly and choosing actions that express virtue. It requires experience, moral perception, and the ability to see what matters ethically in specific contexts. Aristotle emphasizes that you cannot learn phronesis from books. It develops through practice, habit, and reflection on lived experience. Productive virtue. Techne. Craft, knowledge, skill in producing excellent artifacts according to correct methods. The craftsperson possesses techne when they can reliably create good products, well-built houses, beautiful sculptures, effective tools. This involves both knowledge of materials and techniques and the practical ability to apply that knowledge skillfully. The primacy of theoretical wisdom and its limits. Aristotle clearly holds that theoretical wisdom, Sophia, is the highest form of knowledge. His reasoning reveals deep convictions about human excellence and the structure of reality. First, Sophia concerns objects that are more divine than human affairs, the eternal principles and causes that govern the cosmos. The contemplative life that exercises Sophia most fully represents the closest humans can come to divine activity. Second, theoretical wisdom provides knowledge that is valuable for its own sake, not as a means to other ends. While practical wisdom helps us live well and techne produces useful things, Sophia satisfies the distinctively human desire to understand reality simply because understanding is intrinsically excellent. As Aristotle famously begins his metaphysics, all human beings by nature desire to know. Third, Sophia achieves the greatest certainty and universality. Unlike practical judgments that vary with circumstances or technical knowledge that depends on particular materials, theoretical wisdom grasps necessary truths that hold always and everywhere. This gives it a perfection that practical and productive knowledge cannot achieve. Yet Aristotle recognizes that for actual human living, practical wisdom is indispensable. Sophia contemplates eternal truths, but doesn't tell us how to act in particular situations. To live well, we need phronesis, the ability to discern what courage requires in this dangerous situation, what generosity demands given these resources, what friendship calls for with this particular person. As one scholar explains, theoretical wisdom is more excellent than practical wisdom, but practical wisdom is more necessary for human flourishing. Practical wisdom, the master virtue of human life. Phronesis occupies a unique and crucial position in Aristotle's framework because it connects intellectual excellence with moral virtue. You cannot possess genuine moral virtue without practical wisdom, nor can you exercise practical wisdom without moral virtue. They're reciprocally related. Virtue ensures that we aim at the right ends, human flourishing, while practical wisdom enables us to deliberate correctly about the means to those ends. This explains why virtue cannot be learned from textbooks or acquired through theoretical study alone. Reading Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics doesn't make you virtuous any more than reading medical textbooks makes you healthy. Practical wisdom develops through practice, experience, and habituation. You learn to be courageous by acting courageously in situations of fear. You develop generosity by giving to others. You cultivate good judgment by making choices and reflecting on their outcomes. Practical wisdom involves several interconnected capacities that distinguish it from theoretical knowledge. Particularity. While episteme deals with universals, Phronesis operates in the realm of particular circumstances. The practically wise person doesn't just know general ethical principles. They perceive what matters morally in this situation with these people at this moment. Deliberation. Practical wisdom enables excellent deliberation, eubulia, the ability to reason well about what actions will promote human flourishing. This isn't algorithmic calculation, but thoughtful consideration of complex, value-laden situations where multiple goods may conflict. Experience. Unlike theoretical knowledge that can be grasped by brilliant young mathematicians, practical wisdom requires lived experience. As Aristotle notes, young people can become mathematically accomplished but rarely possess phronesis because they lack the experiential base for good practical judgment. Integration. Practical wisdom integrates emotion and reason, perception and deliberation, particular circumstances and general principles. The wise person feels appropriately, neither too much nor too little fear, anger, desire, and acts accordingly. The contemporary relevance of integrated knowledge. Aristotle's vision of unified yet differentiated knowledge offers profound resources for addressing contemporary intellectual challenges. The modern academic tendency toward hyperspecialization has produced extraordinary depth in narrow domains, but often at the cost of integrative understanding. Scientists may lack philosophical reflection on their methods. Humanists may lack scientific literacy. Technical experts may lack ethical wisdom to guide application of their knowledge. Aristotle reminds us that genuine wisdom requires both breadth and depth, specialized expertise combined with understanding of how different domains connect. His framework suggests that excellent education should cultivate multiple intellectual virtues: the theoretical understanding that grasps first principles, the scientific knowledge that demonstrates systematic connections, the practical wisdom that guides action, and the technical skill that produces excellent work. Moreover, Aristotle's emphasis on practical wisdom as irreducible to theoretical knowledge challenges modern assumptions that all important knowledge can be formalized, quantified, or taught through explicit instruction. Fields requiring excellent judgment, medicine, education, leadership, counseling, cannot replace experienced practitioners with algorithms or protocols, no matter how sophisticated. The cultivation of phronesis remains essential and requires apprenticeship, mentorship, and reflective practice over time. Balancing contemplation and action. Aristotle's framework presents a tension that scholars continue debating. Is the contemplative life of theoretical wisdom or the active life of practical virtue the highest human good? At times, Aristotle seems to elevate contemplation as the most divine and complete form of human flourishing. Yet he also recognizes that humans aren't purely contemplative beings. We're social and political animals whose flourishing requires practical virtue and active engagement in community life. Perhaps the most Aristotelian resolution is that complete human flourishing integrates both dimensions. The best human life exercises Sophia in contemplating truth and phronesis in acting virtuously, theoretical wisdom for its intrinsic excellence and practical wisdom for living well with others. As one scholar puts it, practical wisdom arranges life so that contemplation can occur, while contemplation provides the understanding that guides practical wisdom toward the best ends. This integration reflects Aristotle's broader vision. Knowledge is fundamentally unified, yet different aspects of reality require different modes of understanding. Theoretical sciences grasp necessary truths about unchanging realities. Practical wisdom navigates contingent circumstances of human action. Productive knowledge creates excellent artifacts. Excellence requires developing appropriate intellectual virtues for each domain, while recognizing how they interconnect and support each other in the unified project of understanding reality and living well within it. In this sense, the ultimate Aristotelian ideal is the person who combines the contemplative depth of the philosopher with the practical wisdom of the excellent citizen, someone who both understands the cosmos and knows how to live well within it. Critique and counter-arguments. Of course, Aristotle wasn't without his blind spots and limitations. His philosophical system, despite its brilliance and lasting influence, contains troubling assumptions and exclusions that modern thinkers rightfully challenge. Understanding these criticisms doesn't diminish Aristotle's achievements, but rather demonstrates how even the most profound philosophical frameworks must be critically examined and, where necessary, revised or rejected. The problem of natural slavery, a fundamental injustice. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Aristotle's thought is his defense of slavery as natural. In politics, Aristotle argues that some people are slaves by nature, individuals who supposedly lack the full rational capacity for self-governance and therefore benefit from being ruled by natural masters. He claims that just as the soul naturally rules the body and reason rules the passions, Some humans are naturally suited to command, while others are naturally suited to obey. Modern critics rightfully recognize this doctrine as morally indefensible and logically inconsistent with Aristotle's own principles. If humans are essentially rational animals whose telos is eudaimonia through excellent use of reason, how can some humans be naturally excluded from this defining characteristic? The philosopher Nicholas Smith notes the curiosity that Aristotle's account of the natural slave ensures that few, if any, actual people would fit the description. The very definition of humans as rational animals seems to contradict the existence of naturally non-rational humans. Scholars point out that Aristotle himself seems ambivalent about his own argument. After proposing criteria for identifying natural slaves, he acknowledges that nature fails to distinguish clearly between the bodies of free persons and slaves, and that it's even more difficult to discern beauty of the soul. This admission reveals the weakness of his position. If natural slaves cannot be reliably identified, the entire concept becomes suspect. Contemporary analysis reveals that Aristotle's natural slavery reflects the prejudices and economic structures of his time rather than philosophical insight. The doctrine served to rationalize an already existing institution central to Greek economic life, demonstrating how even great philosophers can uncritically absorb and justify oppressive social arrangements. As one scholar notes, Aristotle's account exhibits proto-racialization, attributing inferior rationality to particular groups, especially non-Greeks, in ways that prefigured modern racist ideologies. Gender hierarchy, the exclusion of women. Equally problematic is Aristotle's view of women as naturally inferior to men. In his biological works, Aristotle characterizes women as deformed males whose bodies are too cold to produce semen, relegating them to passive recipients of male seed. He claims that while women possess the capacity for deliberative reason, this capacity lacks authority, akuron, meaning they cannot exercise it independently but must remain under male supervision. This results in the exclusion of women from citizenship and political participation, a denial of the public life that Aristotle considers essential for human flourishing. If the polis is the natural community where humans achieve eudaimonia, and women are systematically excluded from political participation, then Aristotle's own framework suggests women cannot fully achieve their human telos. This creates what scholars call a structural incoherence in his system. Contemporary scholars unanimously recognize Aristotle's views on women as misogynistic, vitriolic and fallacious, and reflecting patriarchal ideology rather than philosophical insight. The consensus is that these views are anachronistic and myopic, and incompatible with principles of gender equality. Feminist philosophers have thoroughly criticized how Aristotle's supposed observations about women's nature actually reflect social conventions of ancient Greece rather than biological or philosophical truths. The irony is that Aristotle's own methodological commitments should have led him to different conclusions. His emphasis on empirical observation, his recognition that virtues develop through practice, and his understanding that rationality is the defining human characteristic all suggest that women's apparent differences result from social restrictions rather than natural incapacity. As one scholar notes, when women are denied education, political participation, and opportunities for virtue development, their supposed inferiority becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy rather than evidence of natural differences. The golden mean, too vague or too relativistic. Aristotle's celebrated doctrine of the golden mean faces criticism from multiple directions. Some philosophers, like Bernard Williams, dismiss it as one of the most celebrated and the least useful parts of Aristotelian ethics, arguing that it provides no practical guidance for determining the right action. When Aristotle says the mean is hard to attain and is grasped by perception, not by reasoning, critics respond that this is simply vague and formal. It doesn't actually tell us how to act. The challenge is that identifying the appropriate response requires context-specific judgment that the golden mean framework doesn't provide. How much generosity is appropriate? How much anger? Aristotle tells us to find the mean relative to ourselves and our situation, but this seems to make virtue subjectively determined rather than objectively grounded. Different people or different cultures might identify different means, potentially leading to moral relativism where any action can be justified as balanced within its context. Some critics argue that Aristotle confuses quantitative and qualitative standards, treating virtue as if it were a point on a spectrum rather than recognizing that ethics involves qualitative terms of this but not. This criticism suggests that virtues aren't located between vices but rather stand opposite to them. You can possess virtue in extreme form, be extremely courageous or extremely just, without it becoming a vice. Defenders respond that these criticisms misunderstand Aristotle's doctrine. The golden mean isn't meant to be a decision procedure that mechanically generates right answers, but rather a framework for developing practical wisdom through experience. Martha Nussbaum argues that Aristotle's list of virtues is actually grounded in universal human experiences, spheres of life like fear, bodily appetite, anger, and social interaction that all humans navigate. The virtues represent dispositions to act appropriately in these spheres, and while specific applications vary by context, the underlying framework has universal scope. Teleology in a post-Darwinian world. Aristotle's teleological worldview faces significant challenges from modern scientific naturalism, particularly evolutionary biology. If natural selection can explain the apparent purposiveness of organisms through blind mechanistic processes, random variation plus differential reproduction, does this eliminate the need for or validity of teleological explanation? The traditional critique holds that Darwinian evolution rendered Aristotelian teleology obsolete by showing how design-like features arise without inherent purposes or goals. From this perspective, when we say a bird's wings are for flight, we're merely describing their evolutionary history and current function, not attributing genuine purposiveness to nature. However, recent scholarship suggests this critique is overstated. As discussed earlier, many philosophers of biology now argue that Aristotelian teleology, properly understood, is actually compatible with and perhaps required by evolutionary explanation. Natural selection presupposes that traits have functions and organisms exhibit goal-directed behavior. It explains how this functional organization arose, not whether it exists. As one biologist writes, to deny teleology, in fact, is to deny Darwinian evolution. The issue isn't whether biological systems exhibit purposiveness, but rather whether this purposiveness is immanent, arising from natural processes, or externally imposed, designed by an intelligence. Aristotle's immanent teleology aligns well with evolutionary explanation, while external design arguments do not. Elitism and exclusion, the limited scope of citizenship. Aristotle's political philosophy reflects a troubling elitism and exclusivity that restricts full citizenship and human flourishing to a narrow privileged class. His ideal citizen is a free, property-owning Greek male with sufficient leisure to participate in political deliberation. Excluded are slaves, women, foreigners, metics, and laborers, the vast majority of any actual Greek city-state's population. This raises fundamental questions about the universality of Aristotle's ethics. If eudaimonia requires political participation, but most people are systematically excluded from politics, then Aristotle's philosophy seems to offer a vision of human flourishing accessible only to an elite minority. As one scholar notes, for Aristotle, good life is only available for men, only for Greeks, and only for the free elite living in a polis. Modern critics argue that this exclusionary framework is incompatible with democratic values and contemporary understandings of human rights. The notion that citizenship should be limited to those who actively hold office or participate in governance seems impractical for large modern nation-states and unjustifiably excludes economic producers, laborers, and others who contribute to society's welfare. Moreover, Aristotle's emphasis on duties to the community over individual rights strikes many contemporary thinkers as problematic. While communitarian critics of liberal individualism sometimes appeal to Aristotelian themes, they must grapple with how his framework can be adapted to honor individual autonomy and equal dignity in ways Aristotle himself did not recognize. Cultural relativism versus universal human nature. Finally, Aristotle's ethics faces tension regarding cultural variation. On one hand, his framework seems to presuppose a universal human nature with a common telos, suggesting objective ethical standards applicable across cultures. On the other hand, the specific virtues and their appropriate expression clearly vary by cultural context and individual circumstances. Some argue this makes Aristotelian virtue ethics vulnerable to cultural relativism. If what counts as flourishing differs across cultures, there may be no objective standard for evaluating different ways of life. Others, like Nussbaum, respond that while virtue-specific expressions vary, the underlying spheres of human experience are universal, providing a non-relative foundation for ethical evaluation. Synthesizing the critique. These criticisms reveal that even profound philosophical systems contain serious flaws requiring critical engagement. Aristotle's defense of slavery and subordination of women are not peripheral errors but rather systematic applications of his principles in ways that modern ethics must decisively reject. His political philosophy's exclusivity, the potential vagueness of the golden mean, and tensions with modern science all require thoughtful responses from those who find value in Aristotelian approaches. Yet recognizing these flaws need not require wholesale rejection of Aristotelian philosophy. Many contemporary virtue ethicists argue that the core insights about character, practical wisdom, human flourishing, and the cultivation of excellence can be preserved while rejecting the indefensible applications. The challenge is separating universal aspects of Aristotle's thought from those that reflect ancient Greek prejudices, demonstrating both the power and the limitations of even the greatest philosophical traditions.